It was a cold Friday evening in November, when everything changed for a woman named Renata. The kind of evening where the wind cut through your jacket and made you wish you had stayed home under a warm blanket. But Renata could not stay home. She had bills to pay, a daughter to feed, and a life that demanded she keep moving no matter how tired her bones felt. Renata worked as a waitress at a place called the Golden Oak Bistro. It was one of those fancy restaurants where a single plate of food cost more than what most people earned in a day. The kind of place where rich people came to show off their wealth, where businessmen closed deals over expensive steaks, and where celebrities sometimes walked through the doors expecting everyone to recognize them. She had been working there for almost 2 years now. 2 long years of smiling at people who barely looked at her face. 2 years of carrying heavy trays, memorizing complicated orders, and pretending that the rude comments did not hurt. But she never complained. She could not afford to complain. Her daughter Mila was only 8 years old, and she needed things that only money could buy: medicine, doctor visits, a safe place to sleep at night. That Friday, the restaurant was hosting a special charity event. The dining hall was filled with wealthy donors, local politicians, and a few television personalities. Everyone was dressed in expensive suits and glittering dresses. The air smelled like perfume and wine. Soft music played in the background while waiters moved silently between tables like shadows. Renata had already been on her feet for 11 hours. Her back ached, her ankles were swollen, but she kept that familiar smile on her face because that was what the job required. She had learned long ago that nobody wanted to see a tired waitress. They wanted someone who looked happy to serve them, even if that happiness was just a mask. Around 8 in the evening, a group of 4 men walked into the restaurant. They had not made a reservation, which was a problem because every table had been booked weeks in advance for the charity event. The man leading the group was tall with graying hair and a face that looked like it had never heard the word no. He wore a dark suit that probably cost more than Renata's entire year of rent. His name was Vincent Caldwell, and he was the kind of man who believed the world owed him something just because he had money. Vincent had made his fortune in real estate. He bought old buildings, kicked out the people living there, and turned them into luxury apartments for the wealthy. He was proud of this. He talked about it often, like it was some kind of achievement. To him, success meant stepping on others to climb higher. And tonight, he was in the mood to remind everyone around him just how important he was. When the host politely explained that there were no available tables, Vincent laughed. It was not a friendly laugh. It was the kind of laugh that made people uncomfortable. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "I have donated more money to this city than you will ever see in your lifetime. Find me a table." The host looked nervous. He glanced toward the manager, who hurried over with an apologetic expression. After a few minutes of whispered conversation, a small table near the corner was cleared. It was not the best spot in the room, but Vincent did not seem to care. He had gotten what he wanted. That was all that mattered to him. Renata was assigned to serve their table. She took a deep breath before walking over, reminding herself to stay calm. She had dealt with difficult customers before. This would be no different. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said warmly. "Welcome to the Golden Oak. Can I start you off with something to drink?" Vincent barely glanced at her. He was busy telling his friends a story about a deal he had closed last week. One of the other men, a younger guy with slicked back hair, ordered a bottle of wine without even looking at the menu. He just snapped his fingers and pointed at the wine list like Renata was supposed to read his mind. She wrote down the order and walked away, her smile still in place even though her heart was beating a little faster. Something about this table felt wrong. She could sense it the way animals sense a coming storm. When she returned with the wine, Vincent finally looked at her. But it was not a kind look. It was the look a man gives when he sees something beneath him, something unworthy of his attention. "Is this the best you have?" he asked, holding up the bottle like it was garbage. "That is one of our finest selections, sir," Renata replied politely. "It is a French vintage from—" "I did not ask for a history lesson," Vincent interrupted. His friends chuckled. "Just pour the wine and try not to spill it." Renata poured the wine carefully, her hands steady even though she wanted to throw the bottle in his face. She had learned to control that anger long ago. Anger was a luxury she could not afford. As the evening went on, Vincent's behavior only got worse. He mispronounced the names of dishes on purpose, then mocked Renata when she gently corrected him. He snapped his fingers every time he needed something, like she was a dog being called to heel. He made comments about her uniform, about her accent, about the way she walked. Each word was designed to make her feel small. His friends laughed at every joke, even the ones that were not funny. They were the kind of men who followed powerful people around, hoping some of that power would rub off on them. They did not have the courage to stand up to Vincent. Maybe they did not want to. Maybe they enjoyed watching someone else get humiliated. Renata kept serving them with grace. She refilled their glasses, she brought their food, she answered their ridiculous questions with patience. But inside, something was breaking. She thought about Mila at home, probably already asleep by now. She thought about the hospital bills sitting on her kitchen table. She thought about how unfair life could be sometimes. Other guests in the restaurant noticed what was happening. Some looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to get involved. Others whispered to each other, shaking their heads in disapproval, but nobody said anything. Nobody stood up for the waitress being treated like dirt. The manager watched from across the room with a worried expression. He knew Vincent was an important man. He knew that one bad review from someone like him could hurt the restaurant's reputation. So he did nothing. He just stood there, hoping the situation would resolve itself. But Renata knew it would not resolve itself. She had seen men like Vincent before. They did not stop until they had completely broken someone down. They fed on humiliation the way normal people fed on food. It gave them energy. It made them feel alive. What Renata did not know yet was that this night was about to take a turn nobody expected. Vincent Caldwell was about to make a mistake. A big one, and in just a few minutes, the entire restaurant would fall silent in a way that nobody would ever forget. But for now, she just kept walking, kept smiling, kept serving, because that was what survivors did. The clock on the wall showed 9:15. The charity event was in full swing now. People were laughing, clinking glasses, and writing checks with lots of zeros on them. A jazz band played softly in the corner. Everything looked perfect from the outside, but at table 12, a storm was building. Vincent Caldwell had finished his third glass of wine, and with each glass, his voice had grown louder. He was telling stories about his business deals, about the famous people he knew, about the vacation homes he owned in different countries. His friends nodded along like puppets on strings, agreeing with everything he said. Renata had just brought their main course. 4 plates of the finest steak the restaurant offered, cooked exactly the way each man had requested. She placed them down carefully, making sure everything was perfect, but she already knew it would not be enough. Nothing was ever enough for men like Vincent. Finally, Vincent said, looking at his plate with disgust, "I was starting to think you got lost back there." "I apologize for the wait, sir," Renata said calmly. The kitchen wanted to make sure everything was prepared to perfection. Vincent cut into his steak and took a bite. He chewed slowly, making a face like he was eating cardboard. Renata knew he was acting. The steak was perfect. She had seen the chef prepare it herself. "This is overcooked," Vincent announced loudly. "I asked for medium rare." "This is medium at best." Renata looked at the steak. The inside was pink and juicy. It was exactly medium rare. But she did not argue. She had learned that arguing with customers like this only made things worse. "I am so sorry, sir. Would you like me to have the kitchen prepare a new one?" Vincent waved his hand dismissively. No. I do not have time for that. I will just have to suffer through it, I suppose." He said this loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. A few people glanced over with curious expressions. Vincent liked having an audience. It made his performance more satisfying. As the meal continued, Vincent kept finding things to complain about. The bread was too cold. The butter was too hard. The music was too loud. Then it was too soft. He sent Renata back and forth so many times that her legs started to feel like they were made of lead, but she never lost her composure. She kept that polite smile on her face, kept saying, "Yes, sir," and "Of course, sir," and "Right away, sir." Inside, she was screaming, but outside, she was the perfect professional. Then came the moment that changed everything. Vincent had ordered a second bottle of wine. When Renata brought it to the table, he made a big show of examining the label. He held it up to the light, squinted at it, turned it around in his hands like he was some kind of expert. "You know," he said slowly, "I have always believed that you can tell a lot about a person by how much they know about wine." His friends nodded in agreement, even though they probably could not tell the difference between expensive wine and grape juice. Vincent looked at Renata with a smile that made her stomach turn. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just spotted easy prey. "Tell me," he said, "how much do you know about wine?" Renata felt her heart skip a beat. She sensed a trap, but did not know how to avoid it. "I know enough to do my job, sir," she replied carefully. Vincent laughed. "That is not really an answer, is it? Come on, do not be shy. You work in a fine restaurant. Surely you must know something about wine." The people at nearby tables had stopped talking. They were watching now, sensing that something was about to happen. The air in the room felt heavier somehow. "I have some knowledge, yes," Renata said quietly. "Some knowledge," Vincent repeated, mocking her tone. He turned to his friends. "She has some knowledge, gentlemen." How reassuring. His friends laughed on cue. Renata felt her cheeks getting warm. She wanted to walk away, but her feet would not move. Vincent leaned back in his chair and stroked his chin like he was thinking about something important. Then his eyes lit up with an idea. An idea that Renata could tell was going to be bad. "I have a proposition," he announced. He said it loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. Conversations at other tables died down. Even the jazz band seemed to play softer. "I am going to give you a little test," Vincent continued. "A challenge, if you will. I am going to have 5 different wines brought to this table. Premium wines. The best this restaurant has. And you are going to taste each one and tell me exactly what it is." Renata stared at him. She could not believe what she was hearing. "Sir, I do not think." No, hear me out," Vincent interrupted. He stood up from his chair, raising his voice so everyone in the room could hear. "If you can correctly identify at least 3 out of 5 wines, I will pay for dinner tonight. Not just my table, the entire restaurant. Every single person here eats for free." A murmur rippled through the crowd. People exchanged surprised looks. This was unexpected. This was interesting. Vincent held up one finger dramatically. "But if you fail," he said slowly, "you have to admit, right here in front of everyone, that you do not belong in a place like this. That you are just a simple waitress who got lucky to have a job here." The room went completely silent. You could hear a pin drop. Every eye was on Renata now. Some people looked at her with pity. Others looked curious about what she would do. A few looked disgusted at Vincent, but said nothing. The restaurant manager rushed over, his face pale with worry. "Mr. Caldwell, please," he whispered. "This is highly inappropriate. Perhaps we could discuss this privately." And Vincent cut him off with a sharp look. "I am talking to her, not you. This is between me and the waitress." He turned back to Renata. "So what do you say? Do you accept my challenge?" Renata felt the weight of 100 eyes pressing down on her. Her mind raced with thoughts. This was humiliating. This was cruel. This man was trying to break her in front of all these people just for his own entertainment. She thought about saying no. She could just apologize and walk away. The manager would probably understand. She could keep her head down and finish her shift and go home to her daughter. But then she thought about all the time she had kept her head down. All the time she had swallowed her pride and accepted disrespect because she needed the job. All the time she had let people like Vincent make her feel worthless. Something inside her shifted. A spark that had been buried for years suddenly flickered to life. She remembered who she used to be. Before the tragedy. Before the loss. Before life had beaten her down and forced her to start over from nothing. She remembered the woman she was before all of this. And in that moment, standing in front of a room full of strangers, she made a decision. "I accept," she said quietly. Vincent blinked. Surprised. He had clearly expected her to refuse. He had expected her to crumble under the pressure and run away crying. That was probably what he wanted. An easy victory, a story to tell at parties. But Renata did not crumble. She stood tall, her chin lifted, her eyes steady. "I accept your challenge," she said again, louder this time. Her voice did not shake. Her hands did not tremble. The crowd began to whisper. Who was this waitress? Why did she look so confident all of a sudden? What did she know that they did not? Vincent recovered quickly, putting his smug smile back on his face. "Well then," he said, clapping his hands together. "This should be entertaining." He waved at the manager. "Bring us 5 of your finest wines. Remove the labels. Let us see what our little waitress is made of." The manager hesitated, looking at Renata with concern. She gave him a small nod. It was okay. She knew what she was doing, or at least, she hoped she did. As the manager walked away to get the wines, Renata took a deep breath. The whole room was watching her. Waiting. Wondering. She had just agreed to the biggest gamble of her life. And in a few minutes, everyone would find out if she had made a terrible mistake or the best decision she had ever made. The manager returned a few minutes later carrying a silver tray. On it sat 5 wine glasses, each filled with a different wine. The bottles had been left in the kitchen, their labels hidden from view. Nobody in that room except the sommelier who had poured them knew what was in those glasses. A hush fell over the restaurant. Even the jazz band had stopped playing. Every guest had turned their chair to watch what was about to happen. It was like the whole world had paused to witness this moment. Vincent Caldwell stood near his table with his arms crossed and a satisfied smile on his face. He looked like a man who had already won. In his mind, this was going to be easy. A simple waitress against 5 premium wines? She would be lucky to get even one right. And when she failed, he would have the perfect story to tell at his next dinner party. The night he humiliated a waitress who thought she was better than she was. But Vincent did not know Renata's story. Nobody in that room did. They saw a tired woman in a server's uniform. They saw someone who looked like she did not belong among the wealthy and powerful. They saw what they expected to see. They did not see the truth. 3 years ago, Renata Oliveira was not a waitress. She was one of the most respected sommeliers on the East Coast. A sommelier is a wine expert, someone who has spent years studying everything about wine. The regions where grapes are grown, the way soil and weather affect flavor, the history of vineyards that have been making wine for centuries. It takes thousands of hours of study and practice to become a certified sommelier. Renata had done all of that, and more. She had trained at the Culinary Institute of America, one of the best schools in the country. She had worked at a Michelin-starred restaurant in New York City, the kind of place where a single meal cost more than most people's monthly rent. Famous chefs knew her name. Wine collectors asked for her opinion. She had once been flown to France just to help a billionaire choose wines for his private collection. That was her life, a life filled with passion and purpose and respect. Then, everything fell apart. Her husband, Diego, was a kind man with a gentle heart. He worked as a carpenter, building beautiful furniture with his hands. They had met at a small wine bar in Brooklyn, when Renata was still a student. He knew nothing about wine, but he loved listening to her talk about it. He said her eyes lit up like stars when she described a good vintage. They got married on a rainy afternoon in spring. Their daughter Mila was born 2 years later. Life was not perfect, but it was good. They had each other. They had their little girl. They had hope for the future. Then Diego got sick. It started with headaches that would not go away. Then came the dizziness, the confusion, the moments where he would forget simple things, like where he put his keys, or what day it was. The doctors ran tests, lots of tests, and finally, they gave him a diagnosis that no family ever wants to hear: A brain tumor. Aggressive. Inoperable. The next 18 months were a blur of hospital visits, experimental treatments, and sleepless nights. Renata took leave from her job to care for him. The medical bills piled up faster than they could pay them. They burned through their savings. They sold their car. They borrowed money from family and friends. None of it was enough. Diego passed away on a Tuesday morning in October. Mila was only 5 years old. She did not fully understand why her father was not coming home. She kept asking when Daddy would be back. And each time she asked, Renata felt her heart shatter into smaller pieces. After the funeral, Renata tried to go back to work. But she had been away for too long. Her position had been filled. The restaurant industry moves fast, and there was no room for someone who had stepped away, no matter how talented she was. She applied to other high-end restaurants, but nobody was hiring. The economy had taken a downturn. Fancy restaurants were closing, not opening, and the ones that remained wanted young sommeliers, fresh faces, people who had not been out of the game for almost 2 years. The debt collectors started calling. The landlord sent warning letters. Renata was drowning, and there was no one to throw her a lifeline. So she did what she had to do. She took whatever job she could find. That job was waitressing at the Golden Oak Bistro. It was humbling. It was painful. Every night, she served wine to people who had no idea what they were drinking. She watched them swirl glasses incorrectly, sniff wines the wrong way, and make confident statements that were completely wrong. She never corrected them. She just smiled and nodded, and brought them whatever they ordered. She told herself it was temporary. Just until she got back on her feet. Just until she paid off the debts and found a way back to her old life. But weeks turned into months. And months turned into years. And somewhere along the way, she stopped believing that her old life would ever come back. She buried that part of herself deep inside. The sommelier. The expert. The woman who used to command respect in rooms full of powerful people. That woman felt like a stranger now, a ghost from another lifetime. But ghosts do not disappear forever. Sometimes, they come back when you need them most. Standing in that restaurant, facing 5 mystery wines and a crowd of strangers, Renata felt something stir inside her. It was like a door that had been locked for years was slowly creaking open. She looked at Vincent Caldwell, at his smug face and his expensive suit. She looked at his friends, who were already snickering in anticipation of her failure. She looked at the other guests, some curious, some sympathetic, all waiting to see what would happen. Then she looked at the 5 glasses of wine on the tray, and suddenly, she was not a waitress anymore. She was Renata Oliveira, certified sommelier, graduate of the Culinary Institute of America, former wine director of a Michelin-starred restaurant. She was the woman who had once identified a 40-year-old Burgundy with her eyes closed. The woman who could tell you which side of a hill a grape was grown on just by tasting the wine. That woman was still in there. Buried, but not gone. Beaten down, but not broken. The manager placed the tray on a small table that had been set up in the center of the room. He looked at Renata with worried eyes. "Are you sure about this?" he whispered. Renata nodded slowly. "Yes." She stepped forward. The room was so quiet that she could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She picked up the first glass and held it to the light. The wine was a deep ruby red, almost like liquid jewels. Vincent leaned forward, eager to watch her fail. "Take your time," he said mockingly. "No rush. Although I am curious to see how quickly you embarrass yourself." Renata ignored him. She tilted the glass slightly, examining the way the wine moved against the sides. She noted the color at the edge, the way it faded from dark red to a lighter garnet. Already, her mind was working, pulling information from deep in her memory. She brought the glass to her nose and inhaled gently. She did not sniff loudly like amateurs do. She let the aromas come to her naturally, layer by layer. Dark fruit, oak, something earthy underneath, a hint of tobacco and dried herbs. The crowd watched in silence. Something had changed in Renata's posture. She stood straighter now. Her movements were precise and confident. She did not look like a nervous waitress anymore. She looked like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Vincent's smile flickered. Just for a moment. Just enough to show that a tiny seed of doubt had been planted in his mind. Renata closed her eyes and took a small sip of the wine. She let it rest on her tongue, breathing in gently through her lips to aerate it. The flavors bloomed in her mouth like flowers opening at dawn. And then she knew. She opened her eyes and looked directly at Vincent Caldwell. The entire room held its breath. Renata set down the first glass and spoke in a voice that was calm and steady. A voice that did not belong to a nervous waitress. A voice that belonged to someone who had done this 1,000 times before. "This is a Chateau Margaux," she said, "from the Bordeaux region of France. The vintage is 2015. It was aged in French oak barrels for approximately 20 months. The soil where these grapes were grown is a mixture of gravel and clay, which gives the wine its distinctive mineral undertone." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You can taste notes of blackcurrant, violet, and a hint of licorice. There is also a subtle smokiness that comes from the oak aging process. This bottle retails for around $500, though prices vary depending on where you buy it." The room was dead silent. Vincent Caldwell's smile had frozen on his face. His friends exchanged confused glances. This was not what they had expected. This was not what anyone had expected. The restaurant manager looked at the sommelier who had poured the wines. The sommelier checked his notes, then looked up with wide eyes and nodded slowly. She was right. Completely right. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People leaned forward in their seats. Who was this woman? How did a waitress know so much about wine? But Renata was not finished. She picked up the second glass without hesitation. This wine was lighter in color. A pale golden yellow that sparkled under the chandelier lights. She swirled it gently, watching how the liquid moved. She brought it to her nose and breathed in. Then, she took a small sip, holding it in her mouth for a moment before swallowing. "This is a Puligny Montrachet Premier Cru," she announced. "From Burgundy, France. The vintage is 2018. It is made from Chardonnay grapes, grown in limestone-rich soil, which gives it that bright acidity and elegant structure." She tilted her head slightly, as if remembering something from long ago. "The flavors include green apple, white peach, and a touch of honey. There is also a buttery quality from the malolactic fermentation process. This bottle sells for around $350. Again, the sommelier checked his notes. Again, he nodded in confirmation. 2 for 2. The crowd began to buzz with excitement. People were whispering to each other, pointing at Renata, trying to figure out what was happening. A woman at a nearby table had taken out her phone and was recording everything. Vincent's face had changed. The smugness was gone now, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. He had not planned for this. He had expected an easy victory, a humiliated waitress, a funny story to tell. Instead, he was watching his trap fall apart, piece by piece. "Lucky guesses," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Nobody believed him. Not even his own friends. Renata picked up the third glass. This wine was a beautiful shade of pink, like a summer sunset captured in liquid form. She went through the same process. Swirl, sniff, sip, think. "This is a Domaines Haut Chateau de Celly Rosé," she said. "From the Provence region of France. The vintage is 2021. It is made primarily from Grenache grapes, with some Cinsault blended in for freshness." Her voice grew warmer as she spoke, like she was greeting an old friend. "The aroma is delicate. Strawberries, white flowers, and a hint of citrus zest. On the palate, it is dry and crisp, with a long, refreshing finish. This is considered one of the finest rosés in the world. It costs around $120 per bottle." The sommelier did not even need to check his notes this time. He just smiled and nodded. 3 for 3. Renata had already won the challenge. Vincent had said she needed to get 3 out of 5 correct. She had done it. The bet was settled. Dinner for the entire restaurant was on him now, but she did not stop. She picked up the fourth glass. This wine was deep and dark, almost purple in color. It looked heavy and serious, like it had important secrets to share. Renata took her time with this one. She studied the color for a long moment. She inhaled the aromas slowly, letting them tell their story. When she finally tasted it, she closed her eyes and stayed silent for several seconds. The room waited. "This is a Barolo from the Piedmont region of Italy," she finally said. "Made from Nebbiolo grapes. The vintage is 2016. It was aged for at least 3 years in oak barrels before being released." She opened her eyes and looked at the glass with something like affection. "Barolo is called the king of wines in Italy. This one has aromas of dried roses, tar, and cherries. The tannins are firm but elegant. There is a beautiful balance between power and grace. A bottle like this would cost around $400. Maybe more depending on the producer." The sommelier was grinning now. He gave a thumbs up to confirm. 4 for 4. The crowd erupted in applause. People were clapping, cheering, some even standing up from their seats. It was like watching a sports game where the underdog was winning against all odds. Vincent Caldwell stood frozen. His face had turned pale. His friends had stopped laughing long ago. They looked embarrassed now, like they wished they could disappear into the floor. But Renata was not done yet. There was still one glass left. She picked it up slowly. This wine was a deep garnet color, with hints of brick red at the edges. Just from the color, she could tell it was old. Very old. She swirled it gently, being careful not to disturb the delicate liquid too much. Older wines are fragile. They need to be treated with respect. She brought it to her nose and inhaled. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Recognition. Memory. Something personal that nobody else in the room could understand. She tasted it. And when she spoke, her voice was softer than before. Almost reverent. "This is a Screaming Eagle Cabernet Sauvignon," she said. "From Napa Valley, California. The vintage is 2010. A gasp went through the crowd. Even people who knew nothing about wine recognized that name. Screaming Eagle was legendary. It was one of the most expensive and sought-after wines in the entire world. Some bottles sold for thousands of dollars at auction. Screaming Eagle produces only a few hundred cases each year," Renata continued. "The grapes are grown on a small estate in Oakville. This wine has aromas of black cherry, cassis, and dark chocolate. There is a hint of graphite and fresh herbs. The tannins are silky smooth, almost like velvet on the tongue." She paused and looked at the glass one more time. A bottle of this vintage would sell for around $3,000, maybe more to the right collector. The room exploded. People jumped to their feet. The applause was deafening. Strangers were hugging each other. Someone shouted bravo at the top of their lungs. The woman who had been recording on her phone was crying actual tears. 5 for 5. Perfect score. Renata set down the final glass and stood quietly in the middle of the chaos. She did not celebrate. She did not gloat. She just stood there with her hands folded in front of her, looking calm and composed. The restaurant manager rushed over to her with tears in his eyes. He did not know what to say. He just grabbed her hand and shook it over and over again. The sommelier who had poured the wines walked up to her with a look of pure admiration on his face. "That was incredible," he said. "I have been doing this for 15 years, and I could not have done what you just did." "Who are you?" Renata smiled softly. "I am just a waitress," she said. But everyone in that room knew that was not true. They had just witnessed something extraordinary, something they would remember for the rest of their lives. And through it all, Vincent Caldwell stood alone at his table. His friends had quietly stepped away from him, as if being near him was suddenly embarrassing. His face was red. His hands were shaking. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire world crumble in front of him. He had come to this restaurant to humiliate a waitress. Instead, he had been humiliated in front of 100 witnesses, and the night was not over yet. Renata turned to look at him. Their eyes met across the room. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Her silence spoke louder than any words ever could. Then she straightened her apron, lifted her chin, and walked calmly toward the kitchen. The crowd parted to let her through, still clapping, still cheering. She moved through them like a queen walking through her kingdom. Behind her, Vincent Caldwell sank slowly into his chair. He had lost, and everyone knew it. Renata did not sleep that night. After her shift ended, she went home to her small apartment and sat on the edge of her bed for a long time. Her hands were still trembling. Not from fear anymore, from something else. Relief, maybe, or the strange feeling of meeting yourself again after years of being lost. Mila was asleep in the next room, her small chest rising and falling peacefully. Renata watched her daughter through the half-open door and felt tears streaming down her cheeks. She had not cried in a long time. She had taught herself not to cry because crying felt like giving up. But these tears were different. These tears felt like letting go. She did not know yet that her life was about to change forever. The woman who had recorded the whole thing on her phone posted the video online that same night. By morning, it had 10,000 views. By noon, it had 100,000. By the time Renata woke up the next day, the video had been seen by over 2 million people and was still climbing. The internet had found its new hero. News websites picked up the story. Television stations called the restaurant, asking for interviews. Reporters showed up at the Golden Oak Bistro, hoping to find the mysterious waitress who had humiliated a wealthy businessman with nothing but her knowledge and her dignity. Renata's phone would not stop buzzing. Old colleagues she had not heard from in years were reaching out. Strangers were sending her messages of support. People she had never met were calling her an inspiration. She did not know how to handle any of it. For 3 years, she had been invisible. Just another tired face in the crowd. Just another single mother trying to survive. Now suddenly the whole world wanted to know her name. The restaurant manager called her that afternoon. His voice was shaking with excitement. "Renata, you will not believe this," he said. "We have received over 50 requests for interviews. A television network wants to fly you to New York. There is a wine magazine that wants to put you on their cover. And 3 different restaurants have called asking if you would be interested in a job." Renata sat down slowly. Her legs felt weak. "I do not understand," she whispered. "It was just a silly challenge. I did not do anything special." The manager laughed. "You showed the world who you really are. That is not silly. That is extraordinary." Over the next few weeks, Renata's life transformed in ways she never could have imagined. Donations started pouring in from strangers who had heard about her daughter's medical expenses. A crowdfunding page that someone set up without her knowledge raised over $200,000 in just 10 days. Job offers came from everywhere. High-end restaurants, luxury hotels, wine distributors. A famous chef she had once worked with called personally to offer her a position at his new restaurant in Chicago. A winery in California invited her to become their head sommelier. But the offer that touched her heart the most came from a small group of investors who had watched the video and been moved by her story. They wanted to help her open her own wine bar. They would provide the funding. She would provide the vision. For the first time in 3 years, Renata allowed herself to dream again. But there was still one piece of unfinished business. Vincent Caldwell had disappeared from public view after that night. He had paid for dinner as promised. A bill that came to over $40,000. Then he had left the restaurant without saying a word to anyone. His friends had abandoned him. His reputation was in ruins. The video showed him mocking a hard-working single mother. And the internet does not forgive such things easily. For weeks, Vincent stayed inside his penthouse apartment, refusing to answer calls or respond to messages. He watched the video over and over again. Unable to look away from his own cruelty. He saw himself snapping his fingers at Renata. He heard himself making those awful jokes. He watched the smug expression on his own face and felt sick to his stomach. He had spent his whole life believing that money made him better than other people. That success meant he could treat others however he wanted. That power gave him the right to humiliate those who had less. But watching that video, he finally saw himself clearly, and he did not like what he saw. 3 weeks after that night, Vincent Caldwell walked into the Golden Oak Bistro. He was alone. He wore a simple sweater and jeans instead of his usual expensive suit. He looked like he had not slept well in days. Renata was not working that evening. But the manager recognized Vincent immediately. He tensed up, ready to ask him to leave. But something in Vincent's eyes made him pause. "I am not here to cause trouble," Vincent said quietly. "I just want to talk to her, please." The manager hesitated, then made a phone call. An hour later, Renata arrived at the restaurant. She walked in slowly, unsure of what to expect. When she saw Vincent sitting alone at a corner table, she stopped. Their eyes met. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Vincent stood up. His hands were trembling. His voice cracked when he finally found the words. "I am sorry," he said. "I am so deeply sorry for what I did to you." Renata studied his face. She could see that he meant it. This was not the same arrogant man who had mocked her a few weeks ago. Something had broken inside him. Or maybe something had finally healed. "Why did you do it?" she asked softly. "Why did you treat me that way?" Vincent shook his head slowly. "Because I was empty inside. Because making other people feel small was the only way I knew how to feel big. Because I had forgotten what it means to be a decent human being." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I know I cannot undo what I did," he continued, "but I want to try to make it right." Inside the envelope was a check, a large one, enough to pay for Mila's medical treatments for the next 5 years, enough to give Renata breathing room while she built her new life. But that was not all. Vincent had also set up a scholarship fund in Renata's name. It would help single parents who wanted to pursue careers in the culinary arts. Every year, 5 people would receive full funding for their education, plus a living stipend to support their families while they studied. "I called it the Renata Oliveira Foundation," Vincent said quietly. "I hope that is okay." Renata looked at the check in her hands. She looked at the documents describing the scholarship fund. She looked at the man standing in front of her, broken and humbled and desperate for forgiveness. She thought about all the anger she had carried for so long, all the bitterness toward people like him, all the resentment toward a world that had taken so much from her, and she made a choice. "I forgive you," she said. Vincent's eyes filled with tears. He tried to speak but could not find the words. So he just nodded, again and again, like a man who had been drowning and had finally reached the shore. 6 months later, Renata opened her wine bar. She called it Oliveira and Vine, a tribute to her family name and her lifelong passion. It was a small place, cozy and warm, with exposed brick walls and soft lighting. The kind of place where strangers became friends over a glass of good wine. On opening night, the restaurant was packed. Old colleagues came to celebrate. New friends raised their glasses in her honor. Mila sat at the best table in the house, wearing a pretty dress and smiling bigger than she had smiled in years. And in the corner, sitting quietly by himself, was Vincent Caldwell. He came every Friday after that. He never asked for special treatment. He never complained about anything. He just sat alone, ordered a modest glass of wine, and left a generous tip. Sometimes Renata would stop by his table to say hello. They never became close friends, but they developed something like mutual respect. 2 people who had been changed by the same night, in different ways. Renata never forgot where she came from. She never forgot the years of struggle, the nights of doubt, the moments when she wanted to give up. She kept her old waitress uniform hanging in her office closet as a reminder, because she knew that life could knock you down at any moment. It could take everything you have and leave you with nothing but your own 2 hands. But she also knew something else now. Something that night had taught her. No matter how far you fall, you can always rise again. And sometimes, the moment that feels like your greatest humiliation turns out to be the beginning of your greatest triumph. That is the lesson Renata carried with her for the rest of her life. And that is the story she told her daughter every night before bed. The story of how a waitress reminded the world what grace looks like,